My name is Marco, and I am 28 years old. I work as a software engineer in Boston now, but my story begins with a shocking discovery I made while helping my parents pack for their retirement. Hidden in my father's office, I found financial documents that changed everything I believed about my family. My parents had been claiming I was mentally disabled while secretly using my college fund to pay for my sister's education. Now, they might owe me over $150,000. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button, and stay tuned to hear how I uncovered this life-changing betrayal. I grew up in a comfortable middle-class suburb just outside of Boston. Our neighborhood was filled with well-maintained lawns, good public schools, and families who valued education above almost everything else. My father, Robert, worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm in the city, while my mother, Diana, served as an administrator at the local high school. We never wanted for anything essential, though luxury items were carefully budgeted for and often saved as special birthday or Christmas presents. My sister Amber is 2 years younger than me. Growing up, we had what I thought was a normal sibling relationship with the usual rivalries, an occasional alliance against parental rules. She had wavy brown hair that everyone complimented, an easy laugh, and a natural ability to make friends wherever she went. I was more reserved, preferring books and computers to large social gatherings. From my earliest memories, my parents emphasized the importance of education. They constantly reminded us that they were saving for our college funds, making sacrifices so we could have opportunities they never had. My father would often say education is the one thing nobody can take away from you, as he carefully recorded deposits into what I believed were equal college accounts for both Amber and me. Throughout elementary and high school, I excelled academically. I consistently made the honor roll, participated in regional math competitions, and joined the debate team where I won several awards. My teachers often told my parents I had exceptional analytical skills and suggested advanced placement courses, which I eagerly took. I maintained a 4.0 GPA throughout high school and scored in the 95th percentile on standardized tests. Amber, on the other hand, was average academically. She earned mostly B's and C's, occasionally pulling in an A in subjects she enjoyed like art and literature. But what she lacked in academic prowess, she made up for in social activities. She was a cheerleader, served on the student council, and organized school dances. Everyone knew her name, and she was invited to all the parties. Looking back now, I can see the signs of favoritism that I was too naive to recognize then. When I brought home straight, as my parents would nod approvingly and say, "That is what we expect from you, Marco." But when Amber brought home a single A among her B's and C's, there would be celebrations, special dinners, and excessive praise for her breakthrough. My achievements were treated as the baseline expectation, while hers were extraordinary accomplishments. When Amber needed new clothes for a school, dance money was somehow always available. But when I needed a new scientific calculator, or wanted to attend a computer programming camp, my parents would hesitate discussing the family budget and suggesting I wait until next year. They justified this by saying Amber needed the social experiences while I was already so smart that I would be fine without the extras. I remember a particular science fair during my junior year, where I spent months developing a complex algorithm that could predict traffic patterns using public transportation data. I won first place at the regional level and qualified for the state competition. My parents attended the regional fair, but claimed they could not take time off work for the state event. Just 2 weeks later, however, they both took a full day off to attend Amber's chorus recital, where she had a 10-second solo. Despite these subtle inequities, I never doubted their love or their commitment to providing equally for our futures. When college application time arrived during my senior year, I was accepted to several state universities with partial scholarships. I was thrilled and expected to choose among these options, considering my academic record and our family's emphasis on higher education. Instead, my parents sat me down for a serious discussion. "Marco," my father said, "we think you should start at community college, and then maybe transfer to a state school later. It will be more affordable." I was stunned. "But what about my college fund? You have been saving for this my entire life." My mother looked uncomfortable. "The economy has been difficult, and your college fund is not quite what we hoped it would be. Community college is the responsible choice right now." I reluctantly agreed, believing their explanation about financial hardship and assuming Amber would face the same constraints when her turn came. After all, they had always stressed the importance of financial responsibility and living within our means. The real shock came the following year when Amber graduated. Instead of being directed toward community college, she was encouraged to apply to prestigious private universities. When she was accepted to Elmhurst College, an expensive private institution known for its beautiful campus and liberal arts program, my parents were ecstatic. There was no discussion of community college or financial limitations. When I asked how they could afford her tuition when they could not afford mine, my father vaguely mentioned different financial circumstances and scholarship opportunities. I believed them because I had no reason not to. I assumed they had received an inheritance, or perhaps my father had received a substantial promotion. Whatever the reason, I tried to be happy for Amber while suppressing my own disappointment. Little did I know that the true explanation was far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. The college fund that had supposedly fallen short for me was being redirected to provide my sister with opportunities that were systematically denied to me. But I would not discover this betrayal until many years later. My first day at Bay State Community College was nothing like the college experience I had dreamed of throughout high school. Instead of sprawling green lawns and historic buildings, I found myself navigating a concrete campus with utilitarian structures and parking lots filled with commuters. While my friends from high school were moving into dormitories and attending freshman orientation activities at universities across the country, I was mapping out bus routes to get to my classes on time. The disappointment was crushing, but I tried to make the best of it. I threw myself into my computer science courses, determined to excel, despite the circumstances. The classes were challenging enough, and some of my professors had impressive backgrounds in the tech industry. I found small consolations in the quality of education, even if the setting fell far short of my expectations. To make ends meet, I worked 2 part-time jobs alongside my full course load. 3 days a week, I stocked shelves at a local grocery store from 5 in the morning until 9, then rushed to campus for classes. On weekends, I worked as a tech support specialist at an electronics store, helping customers troubleshoot their devices. Between work and classes, I barely had time to sleep, let alone enjoy any social aspects of college life. Despite my parents' years of talking about saving for my education, I still had to take out student loans to cover tuition and books. Every semester, I would sit in the financial aid office signing papers that would bind me to years of debt, wondering what had happened to the college fund my parents had mentioned throughout my childhood. When I asked them directly, they would become evasive, mentioning market downturns and unexpected expenses. I had no reason to doubt them, so I accepted their explanations and continued accumulating debt. About 6 months into my community college experience, I drove 2 hours to visit Amber at Elmhurst College. The contrast between our educational environments could not have been more stark. Her campus looked like something from a movie, with century-old oak trees, manicured lawns, and elegant brick buildings. She lived in a modern apartment-style dormitory with a private bathroom and a small kitchenette. Her room was decorated with new furniture, and the latest laptop sat on her desk, a graduation gift from our parents. Mom and Dad help with groceries and spending money, she mentioned casually when I asked how she managed her expenses. They want me to focus on my studies and the social experience, not worry about working right now. I smiled and congratulated her, but inside I felt a knot of confusion and resentment forming. Why was she spared the financial burdens and work obligations that dominated my life? Why could our parents afford her private university education, but not even a public state university? For me, still, I pushed these questions aside, not wanting to taint my relationship with my sister. After 2 years at community college, I had maintained a perfect grade point average despite my work schedule. I applied to transfer to Massachusetts State University to complete my bachelor's degree in computer science. I was accepted with a small transfer scholarship, but it covered only a fraction of the tuition. Once again, I approached my parents about financial support. "We are so proud of you for earning this opportunity," my mother said, "but we just cannot contribute much right now. Amber's education is very expensive, and we have committed to seeing her through to graduation." I nodded, swallowing my disappointment. "I understand. I will figure it out." And figure it out I did. I took on additional student loans, found a higher-paying job as a coding tutor, and applied for every scholarship available to transfer students. I moved into the cheapest apartment I could find 45 minutes from campus, sharing a small 2-bedroom unit with 3 other students to minimize rent. I ate ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches, rarely turning on the heat even during Boston's brutal winters to save on utilities. Meanwhile, Amber continued her comfortable college experience. During holiday breaks, she would talk about her study abroad plans, the sorority she had joined, and the spring break trip she was taking with friends. Our parents beamed with pride at her stories, occasionally glancing my way, with what I now recognize as guilt in their eyes. Despite the financial hardship and exhaustion, I graduated with honors, earning my bachelor's degree in computer science. My parents attended my graduation ceremony, giving me a card with $200 inside, a generous gesture from their perspective. 2 months later, they threw an elaborate graduation party for Amber when she completed her communications degree, inviting extended family and friends to celebrate at a rented venue. By the time I received my diploma, I had accumulated over $60,000 in student loan debt. Each month, a substantial portion of my entry-level software developer salary went to loan repayments. I lived with roommates in a cramped apartment, drove a 15-year-old car that frequently broke down, and calculated every purchase carefully to ensure I could make my loan payments. Amber, on the other hand, graduated debt-free. When she complained about the challenges of finding an apartment in the city, our parents helped her with the security deposit and first month's rent on a nice 1-bedroom in a trendy neighborhood. A year later, when she decided to buy a condominium, they contributed $20,000 toward her down payment. Despite these inequities, I maintained a relationship with my family. I attended holiday gatherings, called my parents weekly, and kept up with Amber's life developments. I attributed the different treatment to personality differences, or perhaps my parents' improved financial situation by the time Amber needed support. The resentment lingered beneath the surface, but I tried to focus on building my career and paying down my debt. If only I had known the truth sooner. If only I had understood that the struggle I endured was not the result of unfortunate timing or financial constraints, but a deliberate choice. My parents made a choice rooted in deception, so profound, it would eventually shatter my trust in Allah, the people who were supposed to love me most. But that revelation was still years away, waiting to be discovered in a dusty box of documents in my father's home office. 5 years after graduation, I had established myself as a successful software engineer at a Boston tech company. Through disciplined budgeting and occasional overtime projects, I had managed to pay down nearly half of my student loan debt. I had recently moved into a modest but comfortable apartment of my own, and finally replaced my unreliable car with a newer model. Things were looking up professionally and financially, though the burden of my remaining student loans still weighed heavily on my monthly budget. That spring, my parents announced they were selling our family home and moving to a retirement community in Florida. "The winters are getting too hard on us," my mother explained during a Sunday phone call, "and the maintenance on this big house is becoming too much for your father." They asked if I could take a week off work to help them sort through decades of accumulated possessions and pack for the move. I arranged for the time off and drove to my childhood home on a Saturday morning in May. The house was already partially packed with labeled boxes stacked in the living room and dining area. "We need help with the office," my father said after greeting me. "There are a lot of documents we need to sort through before we can pack that room." My father's home office had always been his sanctuary, a place where family members were allowed only by invitation. As a child, I rarely entered this room except when called in for a serious discussion or to show a particularly impressive report card. Now, as an adult, I was being granted access to help organize and pack its contents. The office contained filing cabinets, bookshelves, and storage boxes filled with financial records, tax returns, and various documents accumulated throughout my parents' lives. My task was to help separate what needed to be kept from what could be shredded or recycled. "Anything older than 7 years can probably be discarded," my father instructed, before leaving me to the task unless it relates to property or investments. "Use your judgment, but check with me before throwing out anything that seems important." I started with the filing cabinet, methodically reviewing folders of tax returns, bank statements, and household bills. The work was tedious but straightforward. After several hours, I moved to a storage box labeled Children's Records that was tucked in the back of the closet. Inside, I found school records, medical information, and financial documents related to Amber and me. I smiled at old report cards and artwork, pausing occasionally to reminisce about childhood memories. Then I opened a manila folder labeled Marco Trust. The first document I pulled out was titled Special Needs Trust Agreement. My heart began to race as I read the opening paragraph, which described a trust established for the benefit of Marco Williams, a disabled individual with cognitive limitations requiring lifetime assistance and supervision. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Disabled individual cognitive limitations. This document was referring to me, but it described someone I did not recognize, someone who did not exist. I had excelled academically my entire life, graduated with honors, and was now a successful software engineer. There was no universe in which I could be accurately described as having cognitive limitations requiring lifetime supervision. With shaking hands, I continued looking through the folder. I found application forms for government benefits, all listing me as the disabled dependent. There were letters from my parents to various agencies describing fabricated symptoms and limitations that I had supposedly exhibited throughout childhood. Some documents included forged signatures from doctors I vaguely remembered visiting for routine checkups attesting to conditions I had never been diagnosed with. Then I found the bank statements. Years of records showing regular deposits into an account designated as my college fund, followed by systematic withdrawals that coincided perfectly with Amber's college tuition due dates. The most damning evidence was a transfer form showing $60,000 moved from Marco's Education Trust to an account labeled Amber's Tuition Fund, dated just weeks before she started at Elmhurst College. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. My parents had not just favored my sister or made different financial decisions about our education. They had created an elaborate fraud, falsely claiming I was mentally disabled to access benefits while simultaneously diverting my college fund to pay for Amber's education. The betrayal was so profound, so calculated that I could barely breathe. I sat on the office floor surrounded by evidence of my parents' deception, trying to make sense of this new reality. The people who were supposed to protect and support me had instead exploited and defrauded me for years. I was still sitting there, documents spread around me, when my mother came to check on my progress. She took one look at the papers in my hands and the color drained from her face. "Marco," she said softly. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" I replied, my voice unnaturally calm despite the turmoil inside me. "Explain how you and Dad claimed I was mentally disabled when I was not. Explain how you stole the money that was meant for my education. Explain how you let me struggle and go into debt while you paid for everything for Amber." My father appeared in the doorway, alerted by our voices. When he saw the documents in my hands, his expression shifted from confusion to defensiveness. "You are not supposed to see those," he said, as if that were the problem. Clearly, I responded, standing up with a handful of papers. "Were you ever going to tell me, or was I supposed to go my whole life not knowing what you did?" What followed was a painful, confusing conversation where my parents attempted to justify their actions. They claimed they had only wanted the best for both their children, that they saw Amber's social potential and my academic self-sufficiency, and made choices accordingly. "You were always so smart," my mother said tearfully. "You could get scholarships, work through school. Amber needed more help to succeed. So you committed fraud?" I asked incredulously. "You lied about me having a disability I never had." "It was just paperwork," my father said dismissively. "We knew you would be fine regardless. Amber needed the opportunity more." "Just paperwork," I repeated, unable to believe what I was hearing. "You let me struggle for years, take on crushing debt work, multiple jobs while studying full-time, all because you decided Amber deserved my college fund more than I did." My mother began crying in earnest while my father's face hardened into the stern expression I remembered from childhood reprimands. Neither of them denied what they had done. Instead, they tried to minimize it, to reframe their actions as necessary sacrifices for the greater good of the family, specifically for Amber's benefit. I gathered the documents that provided evidence of their fraud, told them I needed time to process this revelation, and drove back to my apartment in Boston. The 3-hour drive passed in a blur of shock, anger, and grief. The foundation of my relationship with my parents had just been revealed as a carefully constructed lie, and I had no idea how to move forward from such a profound betrayal. The week following my discovery was a blur of sleepless nights and distracted days. I requested emergency personal time from work, explaining vaguely that I was dealing with a family crisis. During those days, I spread the documents across my living room floor, examining each one carefully and researching what they meant. I needed to understand the full scope of what my parents had done. After 3 days of preliminary research, I scheduled a consultation with Patricia Fleming, an attorney who specialized in cases involving financial fraud and misappropriation of funds. I arrived at her downtown office, clutching a folder containing the most damning evidence I had discovered. "I have never seen a case quite like this," Patricia said after reviewing the documents. "What your parents did constitutes several types of fraud: government benefits, fraud, misappropriation of trust funds, and potentially identity theft, if they forged your signature on any documents." "Is it illegal?" I asked, still struggling to reconcile the loving parents I thought I had with the people who could orchestrate such an elaborate deception. "Unquestionably," she replied firmly. "They falsified medical information to obtain benefits you were not eligible for. They established a trust with specific terms for your education and then violated those terms by diverting the funds to your sister. And they did this over a period of many years, which shows intent and pattern rather than a one-time error of judgment." She explained that the statute of limitations had not expired for many of these actions, particularly the most recent fund transfers. I could potentially pursue criminal charges, civil remedies, or both. The financial damages alone could exceed $150,000 when accounting for the diverted college fund, fraudulently obtained benefits, interest, and potential punitive damages. "Take some time to consider what outcome you want," Patricia advised. "This is not just a legal decision, but a personal one that will affect your family relationships permanently." With this legal confirmation of the severity of my parents' actions, I began to dig deeper into other aspects of my life that suddenly seemed suspicious. I contacted my high school guidance counselor, now retired, and asked if she remembered anything unusual about my academic record or my parents' involvement. "I always thought it was strange," she admitted during our phone conversation. "Your test scores and grades were exceptional, but your parents frequently requested that we not push you too hard or place too many expectations on you. They suggested you had some learning issues despite evidence to the contrary. When colleges sent recruitment letters because of your SAT scores, your parents asked us not to encourage you to apply to selective schools." This revelation sent me back to my computer, searching through old emails and social media messages. I found exchanges with friends whose parents had apparently been told similar stories. In a message from my senior year, my friend Jason had written, "My mom said your parents told her you have some kind of processing disorder. That is crazy, man. You are literally the smartest person I know." I had dismissed it at the time as a misunderstanding. Now I realized it was part of the narrative my parents had been crafting for years, laying groundwork for their fraudulent claims. The betrayal expanded beyond financial deception. My parents had been actively undermining my reputation and opportunities while presenting themselves as supportive, concerned parents. They had created a false narrative about me that affected how others perceived and treated me, all to justify their preferential treatment of Amber and their financial schemes. Even more disturbing was my discovery of medical records among the documents I had taken. My parents had taken me to several specialists throughout my childhood, and adolescence, apparently shopping for a diagnosis that would support their claims. Despite multiple evaluations finding no cognitive impairments or learning disabilities, they continued seeking assessments until they found a doctor who noted vague attention issues that could be interpreted in different ways. They had used this single ambiguous report taken out of context and exaggerated as the foundation for their claims about my supposed disability. They had built an entire fiction about my cognitive abilities based on a deliberately misinterpreted medical evaluation from when I was 13 years old. The most painful discovery came when I found a letter from my grandmother written shortly before her death when I was in high school. She had established an educational trust for both Amber and me, with specific instructions that the funds be used for our college educations. The letter expressed her confidence in my academic future and her pride in my achievements. She had intended to provide equally for both her grandchildren's education. My parents had never mentioned this trust. Instead, they had incorporated my grandmother's gift into their fraudulent scheme, using their position as trustees to redirect my portion to Amber while maintaining the fiction that my college fund had somehow fallen short. Armed with this growing evidence, I began calculating the financial impact of their actions. The diverted college fund, including my grandmother's contribution, amounted to approximately $80,000. The government benefits they had fraudulently claimed in my name over several years totaled nearly $45,000. The interest on these amounts over time, plus the interest on my student loans that I would not have needed to take had I received my rightful college fund, brought the total to well over $150,000. But the financial damage was only part of the story. Their actions had altered the course of my life in ways that could never be fully calculated. I had spent years working multiple jobs instead of focusing fully on my education. I had missed out on internships and networking opportunities because of my work obligations. I had started my career with significant debt that limited my housing options, delayed my retirement savings, and caused years of financial stress and anxiety. Most significantly, I had been betrayed by the people I trusted most. They had not only stolen from me financially, but had actively created and promoted a false narrative about me that affected how others treated me and potentially limited opportunities that might have come my way. With each new discovery, my anger deepened, but so did my resolve. This was not a simple case of parental favoritism or poor financial decisions. This was calculated, sustained fraud that had significantly impacted my life, and I was determined to hold them accountable regardless of the family fallout that would inevitably result. After 2 weeks of gathering evidence and consulting with my attorney, I felt prepared to confront my parents again. This time, I would not be caught off guard by their justifications or manipulated by their emotional responses. I had facts, documentation, and legal opinions to support me. I called my parents and told them I needed to discuss what I had discovered. They suggested meeting at a restaurant, but I insisted on meeting at their home. This conversation needed to happen in private, away from the restraining influence of public observation. I arrived at their house on a Sunday afternoon carrying a portfolio containing organized copies of all the evidence I had collected. My mother greeted me with her usual hug, acting as if our last interaction had not ended with revelations of fraud and betrayal. My father sat stiffly in his recliner, his expression guarded. "I have been doing some research," I began once we were all seated in the living room. "I wanted to understand exactly what you did and why." "Marco, we already explained," my father interrupted. "We made the choices we thought were best for both of you." "No," I said firmly. "You made choices that benefited Amber at my expense, and you used fraud to do it. I want you to understand exactly what you did legally and ethically." I opened my portfolio and began methodically presenting the evidence. I showed them the trust documents with highlighted sections indicating the terms they had violated. I presented the benefit application forms where they had falsely claimed I had cognitive disabilities. I laid out the financial records showing the systematic transfer of my college fund to accounts for Amber's education. This was not just bad parenting, I explained, keeping my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. This was fraud, identity theft, and misappropriation of funds. My attorney says these are crimes with serious legal consequences. My mother began crying almost immediately, but this time I recognized it as a deflection tactic rather than genuine remorse. My father's face flushed with anger. "You would sue your own parents," he demanded. "After everything we did for you." "Everything you did for me," I repeated incredulously. "You stole from me. You lied about me having a disability. You let me struggle financially while giving Amber everything. And now you are acting like I am the one doing something wrong by holding you accountable." The confrontation escalated quickly. My father became defensive, alternating between minimizing their actions and attacking me for being ungrateful. My mother pleaded emotional explanations, claiming they had only wanted to help Amber because they worried about her future more than mine. "We knew you would be successful no matter what," she said through tears. "Amber needed more help. We just wanted both our children to have good lives. So you decided that my success should come despite your actions, not because of your support," I responded. "You actively made my path harder while smoothing Amber's way. That was not your decision to make, especially not through fraud." After nearly an hour of circular arguments and deflections, I laid out my terms. I want repayment of all the money that should have been mine. My college fund, the benefits you fraudulently claimed, and the interest on both. I also want compensation for the student loan interest I paid because of your actions. My father scoffed. We do not have that kind of money just sitting around. Then you can take a mortgage on this house, or withdraw from your retirement accounts, I replied. You found money for Amber's education and her condo down payment. Now you can find money to repay what you stole from me, or what my father challenged. You will sue us. Drag the family through a public legal battle. Have you thought about what that would do to Amber? Amber did not know what you were doing, I acknowledged. But she benefited from it, and she needs to know the truth too. My parents exchanged alarmed glances. Leave your sister out of this, my mother pleaded. This is between us. No, I replied firmly. This affected all of us. Amber has been living a life built partly on resources stolen from me. She deserves to know the truth. I had already arranged to meet Amber for coffee later that day. My parents tried to dissuade me, offering vague promises to help me now with my remaining student loans, or to contribute to a down payment if I wanted to buy property. These offers only reinforced my understanding of their perspective. They still saw financial support as a gift they could bestow or withhold at will, not as repayment of what they had wrongfully taken. I left their house with no resolution, only a clearer understanding of their unwillingness to accept responsibility for their actions. My meeting with Amber that afternoon was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. We met at a quiet cafe near her condo. After brief small talk, I explained that I had discovered something serious about our parents that affected both of us. Then I showed her selected documents that outlined what our parents had done. Her initial reaction was disbelief. This cannot be right, she insisted. Mom and Dad would never do something like this. I had the same reaction, I told her. But the evidence is clear. They created a false narrative about me having cognitive disabilities to access benefits, and they used my college fund to pay for your education. As the reality sank and Amber's expression transformed from skepticism to horror. I had no idea, she whispered. All those years they told me they had saved specially for my education because of my needs. They said you had scholarships and preferred community college to be closer to home. We talked for hours, with Amber gradually coming to terms with the implications of our parents' actions. She had unwittingly benefited from their fraud, receiving an expensive education and financial support that had been partly funded by resources diverted from me. While she was not responsible for their choices, she had to confront the fact that her college experience and debt-free start to adult life had come at my expense. What can I do? She finally asked, tears streaming down her face. Should I pay you back for my tuition? This is not your debt to repay, I assured her. You did not know what they were doing. This is between me and our parents. I just thought you deserved to know the truth. In the weeks that followed, our family fractured along multiple fault lines. Amber confronted our parents, independently devastated by their deception and the position it put her in. Extended family members began taking sides as the story spread, with some defending my parents' intentions while others were appalled by their actions. My parents made several attempts to minimize the situation and dissuade me from legal action. They claimed they could not afford to repay the full amount, offered partial payments with extensive conditions attached, and even attempted to leverage family pressure to make me drop the matter. After multiple failed attempts at resolution, I made the painful decision to pursue legal action. My attorney filed a civil lawsuit against my parents for fraud and misappropriation of trust funds. The legal process would be lengthy and potentially very public, but I felt I had no choice. Without the leverage of legal consequences, my parents had demonstrated they would continue to deflect responsibility and minimize the impact of their actions. The lawsuit created a final rupture in our family. Some relatives cut contact with me, unable to comprehend how I could sue my own parents regardless of what they had done. Others expressed support but maintained relationships with both sides, trying to stay neutral in an impossible situation. Amber stood by me but struggled with guilt over her unwitting role in the situation. As the legal proceedings began, I found myself mourning not just the financial resources I had been denied, but the parents I thought I had. The people who had raised me, who I believed had loved me unconditionally, had been capable of sustained, calculated deception that caused me significant harm. That reality was harder to process than any financial loss. The legal process was even more grueling than I had anticipated. My attorney warned me it would be challenging, but nothing prepared me for the emotional toll of formally accusing my parents of fraud through the court system. The initial filing led to a flurry of legal maneuvers from my parents' attorney, attempting to have the case dismissed on various technical grounds. "They are hoping you will give up," Patricia explained during one of our meetings. "Most family financial disputes settle quickly because people cannot tolerate the emotional strain of prolonged legal battles with relatives." But I was determined to see this through, not just for the financial compensation, but for the acknowledgement of what they had done. The court denied the motions to dismiss, finding sufficient evidence to proceed with the case. We entered the discovery phase, where both sides were required to provide relevant documents and answer questions under oath. My parents' defense strategy quickly became clear. They admitted to establishing the Special Needs Trust and redirecting the funds, but claimed they had genuinely believed I had learning disabilities that qualified me for benefits. They pointed to the vague medical report from my teenage years and their conversations with teachers about not pressuring me too much. They framed their actions as misguided attempts to help both their children based on a genuine, if mistaken, belief about my cognitive abilities. This defense crumbled under scrutiny. Discovery revealed emails between my parents discussing the strategy of claiming disability benefits for me, with my father explicitly acknowledging that I was obviously not disabled, but that the designation would open doors for financial assistance. There were also messages about ensuring I did not see certain trust documents that would raise questions. The most damning evidence came from my father's own financial records. He had meticulously tracked the money flowing from my accounts to Amber's, labeling them in his personal spreadsheets as Marco's college fund before transferring them to Amber's tuition. These records made it impossible to maintain the fiction that they had genuinely believed the money was not specifically designated for my education. While the legal process advanced, I began working with a therapist specializing in family trauma. Dr. Sarah Winters helped me process the complex emotions of betrayal, anger, grief, and loss that threatened to overwhelm me. "What you are experiencing is similar to complicated grief," she explained. "You are mourning the parents you thought you had, while dealing with the reality of who they actually are. Simultaneously, you are forced to interact with them through adversarial legal proceedings. This creates a complex emotional situation that few people are equipped to handle alone." Through weekly sessions, I began to untangle my feelings and develop coping strategies. I learned to separate my parents' actions from my self-worth, to recognize that their treatment of me reflected their own flaws rather than any deficiency in me. I worked through the anger that sometimes threatened to consume me, channeling it into productive action rather than allowing it to corrode my well-being. During this period, my relationship with Amber evolved in unexpected ways. Initially, I had worried that the legal proceedings against our parents would create an insurmountable rift between us. Instead, the shared experience of confronting our parents' deception brought us closer. We began meeting regularly, processing our changing understanding of our childhood, and supporting each other through the family chaos. "I keep replaying every memory, seeing it all differently now," Amber confessed during one of our conversations. "All those times they praised me for minor accomplishments while barely acknowledging your major ones. The way they always framed you as needing to be protected from pressure or expectations, I accepted their narrative without question." "We both did," I assured her. "Children trust their parents' version of reality. We had no reason not to." Amber struggled with guilt over benefiting from my stolen opportunities, though I consistently reassured her that she was not responsible for our parents' actions. She had believed, as I had, the explanations our parents provided about our different educational paths. Learning the truth had been as shocking for her as it was for me, albeit in different ways. As the legal case progressed toward mediation, I found myself building a new support network beyond my family. Friends who stood by me during this difficult period became more important than ever. My therapist had encouraged me to be selectively vulnerable with trusted people in my life, explaining that isolation would only intensify the trauma. Following this advice, I had cautiously shared my situation with a few close friends and colleagues. Their responses were overwhelmingly supportive, offering perspectives that helped me recognize I was not overreacting or being vindictive by pursuing legal action. "What your parents did was serious. My friend Michael insisted during a conversation where I had expressed doubt about continuing the lawsuit. If they had done this to anyone but their child, no one would question pursuing legal remedies. Being their son does not make it any less wrong or reduce your right to seek justice. 6 months into the legal process, we entered court-ordered mediation. This step required both parties to meet with a neutral third party who would attempt to facilitate a settlement before proceeding to trial. My parents arrived with their attorney, looking noticeably older and more tired than when this process began. I came with Patricia and my own resolve to stand firm on my demands for full compensation. The mediation session was tense and emotionally charged. My parents continued to minimize their actions while acknowledging certain mistakes in judgment. Their attorney argued that regardless of the ethical considerations, certain claims were time-barred by statutes of limitation and others would be difficult to prove in court. Patricia countered with the substantial documentary evidence we had gathered and expert opinions on the legal violations involved. She emphasized that a trial would make all of this evidence public record, potentially exposing my parents to not just civil liability, but criminal investigation for benefits fraud. After hours of back-and-forth negotiations with both sides caucusing separately with the mediator, we reached an impasse. My parents were willing to offer a partial settlement that acknowledged some wrongdoing, but fell well short of the full compensation I sought. I was unwilling to accept what felt like another minimization of the harm they had caused. We left mediation without an agreement, preparing to proceed to trial. However, 2 weeks later, something unexpected happened. My parents' attorney contacted Patricia with a substantially improved settlement offer approaching the full amount I had calculated, plus additional compensation for emotional distress. What changed their minds? I asked Patricia when she called with the news. Reality, she replied simply. Their attorney likely explained the strength of our case and the potential consequences of losing at trial. Plus, I suspect Amber may have influenced their decision. Amber later confirmed she had indeed spoken to our parents about accepting responsibility for their actions. I told them they needed to make this right, she explained. Not just legally, but morally. What they did was wrong, and continuing to fight against making amends was only making it worse. After reviewing the settlement terms carefully, I agreed to accept the offer. While part of me wanted the public vindication of a court judgment, the settlement provided the financial compensation I sought and required my parents to acknowledge in writing the nature of their actions. It also spared all of us the additional emotional toll of a public trial. The settlement included repayment of my diverted college fund, plus interest compensation for the fraudulently obtained benefits, reimbursement for my student loan interest, and additional damages for emotional distress. The total exceeded $170,000, providing not just repayment, but a measure of justice for the years of hardship I had endured. The settlement arrived as a single wire transfer to my account, a surprisingly anticlimactic end to years of deception and months of legal battle. I stared at the account balance, feeling a complex mixture of vindication relief and lingering sadness. The money represented justice in a tangible form, but it could not erase the betrayal or restore the relationship with my parents that I had once valued. My first action was to pay off my remaining student loans. There was something deeply satisfying about eliminating the debt that should never have existed, that had weighed on me for years while I believed my parents had simply fallen on hard financial times. The remaining funds I placed in investments, creating the financial security that had been delayed by years of unnecessary struggle. With the legal battle concluded, I needed to determine what boundaries to establish with my parents going forward. The settlement had included no requirements for continued contact, leaving that decision entirely to me. After several sessions with Dr. Winters discussing the options, I decided on very limited structured contact for the immediate future. I am not ready to pretend everything is normal. I explained in an email to my parents. I need time and space to heal from what happened. If and when I am ready for more regular contact, I will let you know. Their responses were predictably different. My mother sent lengthy emotional messages expressing remorse, mixed with pleas for forgiveness and reconciliation. My father's communications were brief and somewhat resentful, acknowledging wrongdoing in technical terms while still subtly suggesting I had overreacted. Neither response indicated true understanding of the depth of their betrayal or its impact on me. In contrast, my relationship with Amber strengthened considerably. We established a weekly video call ritual, gradually rebuilding our sibling bond on a foundation of honesty rather than our parents' manufactured narratives. She had her own healing process to navigate coming to terms with the uncomfortable reality that her comfortable college experience and debt-free start to adult life had been partially funded by resources taken from me. "I cannot change what happened," she said during one of our conversations, "but I can be a better sister moving forward. I want us to have a relationship based on truth and mutual support." We began creating new traditions independent of our parents meeting for weekend trips to explore New England in the fall or spending holidays with friends rather than returning to the family home. These experiences allowed us to develop a relationship as adults, free from the dynamics our parents had established during our childhood. The healing process was neither linear nor simple. There were days when anger would resurface unexpectedly triggered by a memory or a reminder of the years of struggle that could have been avoided. There were moments of grief for the parental relationship I had thought I had. Dr. Winters assured me these emotional fluctuations were normal and would gradually become less intense with time. Healing from family betrayal is not about forgetting or even necessarily forgiving, she explained. It is about processing the experience so it no longer controls your emotional responses and life choices. It is about reclaiming your narrative and your future. Following this guidance, I began using my experience to help others. I started volunteering with a nonprofit organization that provided financial literacy education to high school students with a particular focus on understanding college financing options. I shared my story selectively, using it to illustrate the importance of understanding financial documents and protecting one's economic interests even when family members are involved. This volunteer work evolved into a side project developing an app that helped young adults track educational expenses, understand financial aid terms, and plan for college debt repayment. The project allowed me to transform my negative experience into a tool that could potentially help others avoid similar situations, or at least navigate them more effectively. Professionally, I continued advancing in my software engineering career, eventually being promoted to a senior development position with management responsibilities. The financial security provided by the settlement, combined with my increased salary, allowed me to purchase a comfortable condominium in a neighborhood I had previously only dreamed of affording. For the first time in my adult life, I felt economically stable and able to make choices based on preference rather than necessity. As months passed, I gradually established what therapists call detached contact with my parents. We communicated primarily through group emails about practical matters, occasionally joining video calls for major life updates. These interactions remained somewhat strained, but the acute pain of betrayal slowly transformed into a more manageable sense of disappointment and emotional distance. The most significant lesson I learned through this experience was about self-advocacy and establishing boundaries. For years I had accepted my parents' explanations and decisions without question, assuming they had my best interests at heart even when evidence suggested otherwise. I had allowed financial and emotional mistreatment because I lacked the framework to recognize it as unacceptable. "You are not responsible for what happened to you as a dependent child and young adult," Dr. Winters emphasized in one of our later sessions. "But as an adult, you have taken responsibility for protecting yourself moving forward. That is significant growth." I also learned about the healing power of truth and transparency. The years of operating under false narratives had damaged not just my financial situation, but my relationships and self-perception. Bringing the truth to light, painful as it was, created the possibility for authentic connections and personal growth that would have been impossible while maintaining the fiction my parents had created. 3 years after the settlement, I still maintain limited contact with my parents. I do not know if we will ever fully reconcile, or if I will reach a point of conventional forgiveness. What I do know is that I have reclaimed my narrative and created a life of integrity, purpose, and genuine connection. The betrayal shaped me, but does not define me. The struggle strengthened me, but do not limit me. If you have ever experienced a family betrayal or discovered that loved ones were not who you thought they were, I hope my story offers some validation and perspective. The path forward is rarely clear or easy, but it is possible to build something meaningful, even after fundamental trust has been broken. Sometimes the hardest experiences teach the most valuable lessons about self-worth, boundaries, and the courage to stand up for yourself. I would love to hear your thoughts or similar experiences in the comments below. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed your perspective on your childhood? How did you handle it? Please like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with anyone who might benefit from knowing they are not alone in navigating family betrayal. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember that even after the deepest betrayal, healing and growth are possible.